Coming off back-to-back days of testimony from Fed Chair Powell in Washington last week, we're right back into the next batch of critical inflation-related economic data to be released this week, with both February CPI and PPI readings coming through. We'll also get February retail sales, Michigan sentiment, and AI takes the spotlight on the earnings front. It's another episode of your bite-sized weekly market prep, the week ahead preview, right now. The week kicks off with more inflation-related data to keep in mind, as we'll get the latest consumer inflation expectation number coming through at 10 o'clock on Monday morning, following Friday's non-farm payrolls number and ahead of both PPI and CPI reports coming up later in the week for February. All eyes will be on this number, which is looked upon as just another data point for the Fed to consider ahead of its next meeting coming up in 2 weeks' time. Remember, the 22nd. Last month, this print showed sentiment for inflation improving, but expectations overall still moving higher. Monday during the session, we'll watch shares of CarMax. KMX is set to hold its annual investor day throughout the entire day. After the close, then, more earnings are on deck. AI will once again be in focus with Big Bear AI, BBAI, and then we'll also get BuzzFeed coming through with their reports. Getty Images, GitLab, and clean energy name OPTT will also be on deck for earnings. BuzzFeed recently announced plans to use OpenAI's ChatGPT to create content for its site, even with recent cost-cutting measures, including job cuts announced by the company. Most analysts are still expecting a wider loss in this report. GitLab, meanwhile, will also be on watch for a potential trade on Tuesday. The company has forecast revenues between $119 million and $120 million. A loss is expected of between 15 cents and 14 cents per Zacks consensus estimates. They're looking for a loss of around 15 cents versus a year ago. Let's go on to Tuesday now. It's the biggest day of the week as far as economic data is concerned. Yep, we're at that point again. It's CPI day once again, coming through at 8:30 Eastern, coming off Friday's non-farm payrolls number and back-to-back days of testimony from Fed Chair Powell last week in Washington. This is a highly anticipated event that the Fed will be monitoring closely going into its next meeting coming up on the 21st and 22nd of the month. Last month, we saw a relatively unchanged month-over-month number that did help to rally stocks throughout that session. Recent data, however, has pointed to higher inflation creeping back in once again. During the session, we'll look to small cap world once again with retail favorite and former runner Veru shares on watch. The company is set to present at the virtual Oppenheimer 33rd Annual Healthcare Conference throughout the day. After the close, then, earnings to come from the retail group once again. Shares of Guess will be on watch, and also home builder Lennar, LEN, set to report. Let's go on to Wednesday, another hugely important day on the inflation front. Once again, we'll get February PPI data hitting the wire at 8:30 Eastern. Also, retail sales for February will give us another opportunity to look for potential underlying strength in the overall economy to have cooled somewhat. In February, we saw data from February pointing to a higher producer price on a month-over-month basis, but the overall annual inflation rate had cooled on prices that producers pay. Wednesday before the open, vegan milk producer Oatly will come through with their latest results. More significant earnings then due after the close. It's the big day of the week with Adobe coming through. Grow Generations, UiPath also among those reporting. Adobe will be the biggest name of the week to report. The company ended 2022 with record high revenues and cash flow as well. They'll look to continue that trend. Most analysts are expecting the company to beat estimates on this earnings report. Cathie Wood favorite then, UiPath could also provide some opportunities for us. ARK Invest remains among the top 10 owners of shares of the company with approximately 8.5% ownership in Path as a total. Analysts are once again cautious ahead of the report, though, pointing out that UiPath may not, in fact, be benefiting from the recent AI craze as expected. During the session, we'll look to Visa shares as well for possible volatility. The company is set to present at the Wolfe Research FinTech Forum. That gets underway at 9:20 in the pre-market. Thursday setting up for another jam-packed morning for economic data, kicking off at 8:30 Eastern. With the February Philly Fed manufacturing reading, building permits for February, initial jobless claims, and import-export prices. Last week, the initial jobless claims data rose to a 5-month high for the first time in months, showing signs finally that the overheated jobs market could finally be cooling. After the close, then, focus will shift to earnings once again with FedEx, MNMD, Playboy, and Cook, Traeger, Grills among those set to report earnings. FedEx is often looked at as an overall economic bellwether and will be on watch after back-to-back disappointing reports from the company. Most analysts, however, have the company penciled in for a loss. Going into this latest report, FedEx shares are up, though, nearly 20% in 2023 so far. Retail favorite MNMD shares could also provide opportunity. Then coming up on Friday morning, the company recently announced plans to offer up to $100 million in a share offering. MNMD shares are still down more than 30% so far this year going into this report. Let's go on to Friday. Pre-market will kick off with a look at the final Chinese EV maker to come through with earnings. Not sure why it's so exciting, but XPEV is set to report in the early morning hours. Peers NIO and Li Auto both have reported already, posting wider losses in the most recent quarter. Most recent Chinese EV sales data, meanwhile, has shown stronger growth in recent weeks for all three of these. We'll have the economic calendar on watch once again to wrap up the week on Friday as well. At 8:30, industrial and manufacturing production data coming through for February. The big one, though, for the morning, going to be Michigan consumer sentiment. That comes through at 10 a.m. There is an inflation portion to that number and has been widely looked upon in recent months. We'll also get the Conference Board's leading indicator number. That'll come through at 10 o'clock as well. The week is setting up to be another important one for the overall market, with the latest and last batch of inflation data set to come through with CPI, PPI, the final data points the Fed's going to consider ahead of its next decision coming up on the 22nd. Again, it looks like we'll get a 50 basis point hike at the next Fed meeting. As always, we'll bring you all the action live as it happens. Join us daily on TraderTV.Live.